Today, I want to talk about one of the most important lessons in this class, maybe the most important lesson, and that is on using evidence effectively. So, if you've watched my videos on syllogisms, you'll recognize this syllogism here. Anything that helps you discover yourself is worth it. College helps you discover yourself, therefore, college is worth it. This is a classic form of an argument, and it's got a claim with two reasons. Now, another way to think about these is these are all generalizations. They're all general statements. College is worth it is a general statement, and it's supported with two other general statements. College helps you discover yourself. Anything that helps you discover yourself is worth it. Those themselves are general statements. Well, then the question really raises itself is how do I know that these generalizations are true? So let's say the claim college helps you discover yourself. How do I know that that's true? That can be supported by two different ways. Ultimately, it can be reasons and other reasons. In other words, another syllogism could support that because you study a wide range of topics, and when you study the world, you learn about yourself. That would be a syllogism to show that college helps you discover yourself, or it can be supported by facts, specific facts. Lucy found herself at Delta. Vance found himself at UOP. Pedro discovered himself at Modesto JC. Those are specific examples or facts that helps you know that college helps you discover yourself. So both are useful. I want to look at reasons. Reasons are really helpful, but there's a limitation. And ultimately, the problem with reasons is they themselves have to be supported by something. So if I have the claim, the generalization college is worth it, that's supported by these other two claims. And then those claims can be supported by other generalizations, and those can be supported by other generalizations. In other words, if I just keep giving reason after reason after reason, I could really go on theoretically forever. And I'm sure sometimes you go at night thinking some thoughts and your thoughts just go on forever, right? So that happens. So that's the problem with just relying solely on reasons. Ultimately, you got to have hard, solid facts at the bottom of your argument that ground it in, that ground the argument. And this is what we call evidence. So let's look at what makes good evidence and what are some different types of evidence you can use. So let's say we start with chocolates, and I love chocolates, but I just don't give me those chocolate covered cherries. So I can't stand those things, right? Now, let's say somebody gives me a box of chocolates and I want to know, should I eat it? Is it going to be those chocolate covered cherries, or is it going to be every other kind of chocolate that I really love? And there's only one way to tell. I can't just give reasons. I've got to try it. I've got to taste it. I got to test it out. Experience is the grounding of it. So I try one right there, and oh my God, it's a chocolate covered cherry. Oh my God. I'm screwed. The whole box is chocolate covered cherries. I'm throwing the whole thing away. Is that a good thing to do? Not me. I'm not going to do that actually, because that's only one sample out of 15. That's not enough. Okay. That's called a hasty generalization or an unwarranted generalization. You see this in stereotypes, right? You meet one person from a certain group and they strike you a certain way, and everybody else in that group is in that same category. Okay. That's called not sufficient evidence. You need to have enough evidence. All right. So let's try this. Let's say I sample three. One, two, three. Great. That's a lot better than one. And I don't have to try all 15. That's getting ridiculous to have to try all 15. So this is maybe sufficient, but it's got another problem. Notice I picked all the ones that look the same. I didn't pick any of the others that look a little different. And that's a problem of unrepresentative sampling. If these are all chocolate covered cherries, but they all look a certain way, and now these others over here, I never tried any of those. My samples were not representative. This happens a lot of times, though, right? Where we make a judgment about the world based on me and my friends and my family and the neighborhood I live in, the city I live in, and that's my world, and I form my worldview on that. But we have to admit that may not represent the other billions and billions of people on this planet. The world might be run very differently somewhere else. So I got to watch out about my evidence that is not typical or representative. Another thing is your evidence has to be accurate. It's a C's chocolate, and they only sell chocolate covered cherries. All right, they only sell chocolate covered cherries. Um, well, that's not accurate. Now, this isn't this isn't so common here, but it happens a lot actually when students are writing about statistics and they read a statistic in an article and then they paraphrase it in their essay and they may change the meaning, and so now it's no longer accurate. So you got to be really careful when you're relating evidence, examples, anything. You got to make sure you relate that accurately. It's also got to be relevant. It must be chocolate covered cherries because the box is colored gold. All right, totally irrelevant to the claim. And um, this is obvious, but in other cases, it's not so obvious. People might give evidence and they make it sound good. Politicians do this a lot. They give some evidence that's really not relevant to the issue at hand, right? Classic politician thing. So you got to be really careful with that in your reading and your writing. Watch out for that. And last of all, the evidence should be specific. In my first sentence, on average, people with college degrees earn a lot more than those without. Okay, um, earn a lot more. Well, what is that exactly? This is much better. On average, people with a college degree earn 60% more than those with only a high school diploma. On average, people with a college degree earn $26,000 more per year. So those are more specific, and that's better. All right, specific. So stars, that's what we want. Sufficient, typical, accurate, relevant, and specific. Now, let's look at the different types of evidence and measure it up against this criteria we've got here. First of all, anecdotes and personal experience. So if we talk about Ritalin, we talk about, my little brother took Ritalin. Now, a couple of things about these personal experiences. First of all, it's specific, especially depending on how you explain it. If you explain it just in vague general terms, oh, my brother took Ritalin, he's doing much better. That's a little vague. But if I give specific details about that, that's great. It can also be vivid. It can be emotionally powerful. We're going to talk about emotional appeals later. Anecdotes, personal experiences, stories like this are great for that. Problem is that sufficient? It's only one example. Would you take a vaccine? It was only tested on one person. I gave it to Joe. He was okay. You'll be fine. I think not, right? You need a sufficient amount. It's maybe not typical, right? Maybe, my Aunt Mary smoked every day of her life. She lived to 100, right? Okay, well, I don't know that she's typical, though. Um, it may not be, it's not verifiable. I'm going to trust you on those personal experiences. If your personal experiences are outrageous, I'm going to be a little skeptical. If you had a personal experience of being abducted by a UFO, I understand it's your personal experience and I can't really debate that, but I'm going to be a little skeptical. These personal experiences, by the way, are really important because they're emotionally powerful, and so they affect our minds in an outsized way. So if all the experts are telling me one thing, but my experience is something different, it's really hard to discount my own experience. And a lot of people just say, forget the experts. I'm going to do what I know. And sometimes I admit I do the same thing. Sometimes I say, I don't trust those experts. I trust myself. Depends on the situation. So those are a little tricky, but they can be very effective. They can be very effective, but there are limitations. So don't just rely on those, but you can include those in your essays. Observations are good too. College is a great way to meet people. In the quad, you can usually find students hanging out, clubs recruiting members, and people playing music. In classes, students often work together in groups to solve problems and set up study groups to prepare for tests. Okay, so this is a little broader than your personal experience. This widens it out a little bit. It's not much beyond yourself, but it's a little beyond yourself. But again, it's the problem. Is it sufficient? Maybe, maybe not. Is it typical? Maybe, maybe not. And is it specific? Depends on how you word it, okay? If you give a vivid description of the students hanging out and this kind of thing, and the life, it can be specific. So it depends. In general, observations tend to be a little too broad. A lot of times students will just give a bunch of generalizations and think they've supported their point, and they really haven't. Now, a little more specific is data from interviews, surveys, questionnaires, that kind of thing. It's surveys you can do. It could be also surveys that you get from online. Pew Charitable Trust, for example, does a lot of surveys. Again, this is wider range than your simple personal experience. It may or may not be sufficient. It might not be typical too. It depends on who you're surveying, right? If I surveyed all the people in my family and we think the Slakeys are the best people in the world, right? Well, all right, that's not typical. Research studies. Now we're getting into some hardcore solid evidence that is very effective. Um, if I give a study about diets and studies about the value of college, studies about whatever, these are very powerful, especially when your sources are respected. If it comes from a respectable institute, that's great. If there are any weaknesses, it may or may not be accurate depending on how you're relaying it. It may not be credible. Maybe there's a study done by the United States UFO Institute, and well, maybe they're credible, maybe not. You might find conflicting studies, right? That can be used, but by and large, research studies are very strong. Um, Expert testimony can also be helpful. It's similar to research, but it's a little less persuasive than the direct data. So this is about acid rain here. And here you have an expert saying what acid rain does. Acid rain is really bad. It's generally better if you can provide the actual data supporting that, but you might not be able to, right? For example, if I'm reading about quantum physics, okay, something that's too detailed, too mathematical to find out. Just tell me the conclusions of the experts, and that's fine. Okay, so some things are just too complicated to go into detail, and there your expert testimony is really helpful, as long as it's a bona fide expert, right? It's got to be a real bona fide expert. Statistics, these are great, right? Again, statistics of all kinds are powerful, and they help solve the problem of sufficient amount, and they help solve the problem of representative, right? Because now this is definitely representative of a wide range of people. Just make sure that it's accurate. How you relay it may or may not be accurate. The statistics might be not very credible, right? The source might not be credible. I'll come across statistics that my students will give. And sometimes I'll say, I wonder if this is true. And I will often follow those up, by the way. If you give me a statistic and you say this, I don't know, 99% of all grandmothers, you know, hate their grandchildren. I don't know. I'm gonna be a little skeptical of that kind of thing, right? So I'm gonna look that up, see if that's really true. So when you read a statistic and you relate a statistic, make sure you do the smell check to make sure it passes the smell check. And even if it's a little fishy, if it's true, then go ahead and put it in there, because that's an interesting fact. Um, Hypothetical examples, cases, or scenarios. So this can be effective. It can have an imaginative appeal. Um, Problem is, it might not be accurate, it might not be plausible, and it's not a specific fact. So I really discourage you from using hypotheticals. Hypotheticals are best used in a philosophical discourse um, rather than kind of a factual-oriented argument. But they can come in handy. I will admit that. Um, if you're going to tell about the value of college and you say, well, if an employer comes across two people, one person who has a college degree and the other doesn't, he's likely to hire the one with the college degree. Well, okay, better to give a real example. Tell me an example. My friend Bill and his cousin Joey applied for a job. Bill had a degree and Joey didn't. Bill got the job and Joey didn't. Okay, case closed. That's much better than this imaginatory one that you're making up. A reasoned sequence of ideas. This is a cause and effect analysis. If you'd like to read this, go ahead and pause the video to take some time to read this. But a cause and effect analysis can be an effective way to show the underlying logic of of, of your argument. Uh, it kind of has a force of inevitability. So for example, if you say, well, college is good because people discover themselves. Okay, you say people discover themselves. If you explain why or how it is that people discover themselves, what happens in the classroom that leads to self-discovery, then that adds an added strength to your argument. Um, Now, there tend to be general. These cause and effect sequences tend to be general. So your reader can object to any of these different cause effect chains. They can object to any of those along the way. But by and large, I think this can be really effective used with other methods. Um, so my advice ultimately is to use complementary sources of evidence to meet the STAR criteria. In other words, use the strength of one and the strength of another to balance each other off and provide to shore up the weaknesses. For example, statistics tend to be a little boring and dull. All right, but they're very it's a wide range, it's representative, it's a sufficient amount of evidence there if you've got enough statistics. But why not put in some anecdotes and personal experiences to help enliven it and make it more real and emotionally appealing? And maybe a reason sequence of ideas here to show why it's necessary that college does these certain things. Maybe add some observations. You use a variety of types of evidence. It can be very effective. It's like when you go to war, you don't just all drive a bunch of tanks, right? You got your tanks, you got your airplanes, you got your soldiers, you got all kinds of stuff, right? Same thing here. Use all your weapons at your disposal to try to annihilate your enemy. All right, very good. I hope you have good use of evidence. It's really, really important in your essay writing. Okay, take care.